Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with veteran jazz saxophonist and vocalist Darmon Meader. He opened up about his new 2023 album called Losing My Mind. He is a founding member of the New York Voices and stands as one of the most gifted tenors, multi-instrumentalists, composers, and arrangers in the craft. And on the second album, he continues to do what he always does. He shines and he's evolved. He's got a great story. Enjoy this interview.
Now, have we met in person at one of our Kansas City, New York Voices gigs in the past at all?
No.
That was last. When was that? It was sometime in the fall, December or something. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, it was kind of when they were reopening the hall after they got finished the renovation.
We probably just, inadvertently ghosted each other. But yeah, I'm sure that we've all collectively been in the aura. So it's great to actually catch up with you. So I appreciate you taking a minute out today.
As long as it was inadvertent, I guess we're okay.
Yeah, right. Are you kidding? Yeah. Especially with this post-COVID world, everything's totally upside down anyway. So,
what do you mean?
Yeah, right. But that is the context. Before we get into Losing My Mind, I want to know, how did you survive that COVID period, and how has it subsequently changed the way that you live your life now?
Well, yeah, the interesting thing is, first of all, I was an early adopter of getting COVID. I had it in March of 2020. So
wow.
I wandered into the COVID experience in a slightly different frame of mind than a lot of people, in that I wasn't afraid of getting COVID. I already had it and was now just trying to navigate it from kind of the other side of that. The interesting thing is, my wife and I had moved. I mentioned we were upstate New York now, a little bit, about an hour and a half north of the city. So we had actually, just by coincidence, moved up here about 6 months before the pandemic started. And so it was actually a slightly more relaxed place to be than certainly down in this New York City area where I'd lived for, the previous 20 to almost 30 years. But it was still so strange. I mean, obviously, people who know my background know my connections with New York Voices, as we're in our 35th year together. So it was very weird to not see each other for so long. We didn't actually see each other as a collective for almost 2 years, because New York Voices is actually, we don't all live around New York. We've got people, one person in Ohio, one in New Hampshire. We're very spread out. So on that side, it was very weird. On a creative side, it was interesting. I mean, this project, my new solo album, really grew out of actually having that time to live in my solo music for a while. I also got into some different kinds of teaching things online and collaborating with some other friends. My good friend Rosanna Eckert and I did some collective improvisation classes together, which was really a nice thing that grew out of that. But of course, it was all under the kind of gloom and doom of wondering, what's coming around the corner. And, I think we're all still feeling that in the arts world, even though we're in theory, we're kind of sort of on the backside of that experience. We're still finding, obviously, that, getting live music on its feet is a little tricky after all that, whether it's the, people still worries about being in large groups, and also just, the money that's involved in the arts is a little suspect right now. So we're all kind of navigating that, but, we do the best we can.
Certainly. So, Losing My Mind, talk to me a little bit about this project.
Well, I had been long overdue for me to do another solo project. Those who follow either me or New York Voices in general know that the 4 New York Voices members all like to stretch out and do our own thing as well. I think it's one of the things that's kept the group together as long as we've been together, is that we all feed our creativity in other ways, not just from the group. But I hadn't done anything on my own in a long time, and partly because it always just sort of sat on the back burner while I was kind of, running the show with New York Voices. And finally there was the time, and I had some arrangements that had been already written, and I started using them on live gigs here and there, and others that were just sort of ideas that were still percolating. And I just sort of dug in and said, this is a time I can do this. And the other interesting thing that happened is that obviously jazz in its purest form, if you're going to record it, you want to be in a studio with everybody that's playing together and singing together and kind of enjoy that spontaneity that takes place in that moment. But some of the arrangements that I'd done were on a larger scale, maybe like a big band or full strings and lots of moving parts. And they were, because of the way they were orchestrated, I thought, you know what, we could try to record these in this virtual realm that we're all playing around with. And so I did that. We passed these tunes around. I built the arrangement in some sort of like MIDI world, and then I'd send it to the drummer, and he'd record a nice drum pass, and then I would record a basic lead, and I'd put some sax. I put the sax parts in for the big band. You know, you get the idea. We're building it like block by block, and I had all these different friends just record from home because we had all figured out how to do that by a year into the pandemic. And what I also did just for fun is I had people just make a little video of themselves while they were recording, so I actually could also put together, you know, some of those like little virtual, you know, multi-box Brady Bunch kind of videos of us doing this stuff together, and I posted some of those when the album came out. I posted some of those online, just to kind of like give it a little other angle so people could kind of see the process. But in doing it this way, it was just kind of something that could be done sort of gradually over the, I don't know, I guess I started kind of in the fall of 20 and kind of finished recording in early 21. But then by the fall of 21, we were kind of like, okay, it's cool to go into a studio again. And so I did get into a studio down in Brooklyn with Andy Ezrin, my pianist, and Jay Anderson on bass, and Marcello Pelletieri on drums. And we actually recorded the second half of the album in the more traditional, like, okay, ready, 1, 2, here we go. And that was great. The energy of that session was so nice because most of us hadn't even really done a session like that in 2 years. And so it was really nice to be back in that environment.
So when did you discover that you had a voice and you were going to pursue music?
I think I knew I was going to go into music as far back as I can remember. I grew up in an artistic family. My father is a painter, and he's a retired college professor, art teacher. My mother, she was a French teacher, but she also is a professional potter. She's still making pottery at the age of 85. So my parents just sort of, you know, the space was there for me to just sort of be a creative kid. But I also grew up kind of in sort of off the beaten path a little bit. I grew up in Maine, and there wasn't a lot of music going on in terms of, you know, public school. There was some, of course, but it wasn't an environment for me to kind of really get super focused. I kind of sort of stumbled along as a kid, but I think I always knew I was going to go into music. I can still remember trying to figure out chords on a piano before I even knew where middle C was. But it was really by the time I got into high school, I started to get more focused on it. And the interesting thing, I always loved to play in band, and I always loved to sing in choir. And luckily, I didn't have to decide. Because one of the advantages of being at a small school, you're just like, oh, you're the musical kid. Come do everything, you know. And so I got to do both. And I actually was studying classical music at first. There was no jazz really experience for me to be a part of as a kid. And by the time I got into college, I really started focusing on jazz. And I happened to be a saxophone player, so I happened to pick the right instrument, so that was good. And I just sort of fell in love with more the freedom of jazz. And I also, along the way, I kind of discovered some of the vocal groups out there. You know, certainly Manhattan Transfer was the big one when I was, going through high school and college. And then that led me down the path of experiencing the High-Lows and the Singers Unlimited and Lambert, Hendrickson, Ross and all these kind of groups. The group Rare Silk that was out about when I was in college. I don't know if you remember that name. All these kind of groups. And I just kind of fell in love with the idea of singing it the same way that I'm playing in a saxophone section in a big band, you know, that close harmony. And I also, along the way, I started doing some gigs where, you know, people said, oh, you sing? Hey, let's sing some tunes with the band. I'm like, oh, sure, okay. And I just started, you know, being the guy that stands in front of the band and sings Night and Day or, you know, When Sunny Gets Blue or whatever. And I started to realize, wow, you know what? I think I really enjoy this aspect of it, connecting to the lyric, connecting to the melody in a different way and all that. So as New York Voices got going in the late 80s, New York Voices kind of grew out of Ithaca College. Those who know the history there, Kim Nazarian, Peter Eldridge, and I are all Ithaca College grads and known each other forever. I just got really excited about doing the group stuff, but also just always thought, the solo singing thing is a part of my personality, as is the arranging, as is the saxophone, all these kind of things. I don't know. I've always been, I'm a utility infielder, I guess, to make a baseball analogy.
Yeah. Well, it's that time of year. So let me ask you this. Of all of the facets of what you have to do as a professional musician, what do you look forward to the most? What's the big motivator?
Well, wow, that's a good question. I mean, it's still that moment on stage. I love recording. That's really fun, and you can get into the minutia in a different way when you're recording. But jazz, in its purest sense, is not necessarily about dotting every I and crossing every T the way you might in the studio when you're trying to document something for history's sake or whatever. It's the spontaneous moment on stage. And so I still look forward to that moment. I've got a couple of those coming up with New York Voices this week, and I'll be like, oh yay, we get to get on stage and count off the tune and see how it goes. That energy. I also have always been as interested, or maybe even more interested, in the collective. I love what it feels like when the big band is just totally locked in and the sound is just amazing. And in the case of New York Voices, when the 4-part stuff is just really rocking and that powerful sound is doing its thing, that to me is as exciting as, me taking a scat solo or singing lead on a tune, or playing a sax solo. So that energy is something I always look forward to as well. And certainly with New York Voices. But I think if I was only doing that, I would get tired of that too. And that's where a project like Losing My Mind comes in, a chance to just explore stuff on my own, within my own boundaries, with my own expectations, as opposed to trying to work through the shared expectations of a quartet.
So let's get to the essence of you. Everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Who do you think you are, mister?
Who do you think you are?
Wow, I'm getting called out in an interview. This is always a dangerous tag, but I do, there's always that term, musician. It's kind of like I have a love-hate relationship with that term, but I kind of feel like I'm that way. I'm a really nerdy musician. I love getting inside the all the harmony stuff and the rhythmic energy and the details, and I can talk about music theory for hours and people start rolling their eyes. I was like, really? Okay, enough of that. So when I get inside of music, I love exploring the nuts and bolts of how it all works and holds together, and then how all of that support turns into something that you don't necessarily, hopefully you don't have to be like a nerdy theory musician person to appreciate the energy of that music. And that's the fine line. It's like getting inside the details, but then when it all comes together, you can just be a general appreciator of the arts and kind of go, wow, I really dug what that person was doing, or I really love the way that song comes together. I don't even know quite why I like it, but it's something very cool happening there. So, I'm an arranger. I think I'm an arranger as much as I am a performer. I love to work through the structure of it. I mentioned I was a classical trained musician first, and I think that sense of classical structure and stuff is part of what sort of, fuels the way I think about the way I arrange jazz as well. So, the old musician moniker, I guess, is the way I think of myself, I guess.
So since we're coming from Kansas City, what's one of your best memories of coming through here with New York Voices that sticks out?
Well, most recently, actually a couple of times now, we've had a chance to play with the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra, which, first of all, kudos to Kansas City and the musicians for having an organization like that. That's something that you don't find as often in the United States. It's funny, the big band sound, I mean, that's an iconic American art form. And yet you don't find it as much on the professional level as we'd like. I mean, you see it at the high school and college level. And then of course there's some killer the bands that come out of like, the Airmen of Note out of the Air Force and things like that. But in terms of just like the pro guys putting together a big band, man, the Kansas City Jazz Orchestra stands out as one of our favorites to collaborate with. We did a concert last year and another one a few years ago. Those have been really cool. And we also played at the big, what's the name of the festival that takes place in Vine, and the jazz festival that we've played there. God, but that might have been 10 years ago or now. I can't remember. I remember having a really good concert at the jazz festival, and also, gee, what a surprise, some very good barbecue.
Yeah, for sure. So if anyone out there wants to pick up Losing My Mind, learn about any live shows, New York Voices work, anything that's going on in your world, where's the best place to go?
Well, if you go to my website, that always is a good place to find the CD. For those who still actually like to have that round disc that we call a CD, that's available through my website. It's also available through CD Baby. And of course, like everything these days, you can find my music on Spotify and Apple Music and all those digital formats. And New York Voices, you can always go to the New York Voices website, which is newyorkvoices.com, and see what we're up to and where and what's next, what's coming around the corner.
Right on. Well, hey, man, I'm glad that we finally got a chance to catch up, even though it's over the phone. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for opening up about your life and world of music. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Mr. Meader for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, you can find Neon Jazz interviews on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you can subscribe to us at YouTube. And for all things Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.